With this story on the Trump administration newly testing the power of the courts, sometimes appearing to openly defy them, facing legal, nonpartisan, and liberal criticism because of the move here over the weekend to go forward with deportations despite what appeared to be clear orders from a federal judge. This clash right now, and I'm going to walk you through it, it does raise the prospect of the Trump administration deliberately defying court orders. Now, that claim itself is part of the dispute. We are going to go through this with the available facts, and as always, reporting everything we know from all sides so you can make up your own mind. But there are valid questions here about whether this is now, and I'm going to say it plainly, an intentional autocratic effort by the Trump administration to break the law and then violate judicial orders that enforce the law they are accused of, and in some cases, according to judicial findings, having been found to have broken. Now, that prospect goes farther than most presidencies in the modern era. You could go back to Nixon for very negative examples where we had a similar pattern. In fact, it goes farther than Donald Trump's first term, which, whatever you think of the politics or the ethics or the rhetoric or the leadership of that first term, we did not see in the main, on a regular basis, what we're seeing here in this new clash from President Trump, 45th President of the United States, first term. So I can measurably show you with evidence why this is concerning, extreme, radical, and potentially lawless. But what we're going to do right now with our report is just go through first the facts we have on this very big controversy. It began with the weekend clash over immigration powers, the administration deporting hundreds of migrants on an emergency basis without any apparent due process. That's based on what we know that came out of a very rushed, controversial process. And again, if we learn more about possible improvements or enhancements to that, we'll tell you. But right now, that's what we know. The administration basically alleged or said these individuals were gang members and then invoked a wartime law, the Alien Enemies Act, and then a judge halted those planned deportations, under that plan. Now, let me be very clear with you. That kind of judicial order is the final word until and unless a higher court intervenes. That's the end of it. And as I said, in the first term of the Trump administration, that's how these things went. You might remember the travel ban was halted, and then it was narrowed, and then parts of it went forward. All of that went through the process that I'm reporting for you, where courts rule and the administration and all of the many officials and agents involved in these type of things follow the law. And the law is what the last word came out of the courts. But now this administration, which has previously followed court orders and did so across the first term, has taken a very different tack, and we have evidence to believe it is not incompetence or a mistake, which, while a big deal, would play out differently, but that it's intentional. This time, despite the order, those planned deportations that had supposed to have been halted went forward, and that plane took off.
President Trump has invoked a wartime law known as the Alien Enemies Act
to deport suspected members of a Venezuelan gang.
A federal judge immediately blocked the president's proclamation.
He ordered the planes deporting Venezuelans to immediately return to America.
The White House is disregarding a judge's ruling on deportations, claiming in this case the court has no authority in the matter,
setting up a potential constitutional challenge.
The migrants flown from Texas to El Salvador. You can see them getting off the plane where they were taken into custody. This video was shared by an administration that is seen as allied with the Trump administration, the leaders of El Salvador. The judge had ruled to stop what you see happen there. And as for the claim by Trump's lawyers that he had war powers that could supersede the normal way these things work, that was invalid because the U.S. was not at war, the judge noted. So the move violates the plain text of the Alien Enemies Act. It also exceeds the limited authority granted to, in this case, Trump's executive branch, by Congress under law, the judge ordering that the migrants be returned to the U.S. unless the plane had landed and they had already disembarked in a foreign country. So that's clear. And beyond the written order, the judge stated any plane containing these folks that is going to take off or is in the air needs to be returned to the United States. So what you see there is a series of acts and events. And remember, for everything that comes down from the president through border officials, through political appointees, there is then the rest of the people inside the government who are U.S. officials who are supposed to follow the rule of law. They all know and have been through this drill before that the rule of law in the United States does not start and end with politicians, heaven forbid, as many people might say. It is ultimately overseen through judges that enforce constitutional limitations. So anyone, any U.S. official aware of those limitations as ruled on by a judge knows the last word is the judge, and you shouldn't be following unlawful orders. Indeed, you took an oath to the Constitution, not to any random president. But maybe we are in a moment where those things are changing. Maybe people are more worried about being ousted and fired legally or semi-legally by Donald Trump and Elon Musk than they are worried about a legal process. Maybe Donald Trump's wanton use of the pardon power, including for people who violently attacked police and others, makes those folks far less worried about any potential federal charge that might come later down the road if it's not going to come out of Trump's DOJ, since he issued the order. And even if it did come out of some other independent process, if he's president, he's certainly willing to hand out pardons for anyone politically loyal to him, even when it means violence against police and others. So that's the context. Now I want to show more reporting on this. Veteran reporter Mark Caputo with Axios filed this exclusive on how the Trump White House deliberately ignored this judge's order, that a judge found Trump basically broke the law, and Trump defied the order on that. Axios' headline you see there is clear. And they, with Caputo's reporting, have this key detail, which would suggest the White House knowingly ignored or violated the order because they had an aggressive legal theory that the flights were at that point over international waters, and therefore they say the ruling didn't apply, citing two senior officials. Well, that's huge because, of course, the U.S. Constitution and U.S. law applies to what the president and U.S. officials do. And just because you run away from the order after, as I said, it was issued and then get to international waters does not mean the place you came from and the color of law and the government you're acting under become irrelevant and melt away. And if you're listening to all this, watching on the news, watching it later on YouTube, listening to me on one of those serious audio reports, I promise you from the sound of my voice that if you're thinking, well, I don't know how much I care about these people who are called gang members, we're all going to care a hell of a lot if the United States government under Donald Trump could ever apply a legal theory like this, because its logical conclusion means if they take you off site somewhere else and can do whatever they want, well, then it's open season on just about anyone, because it's not that hard to throw someone on a plane violating a court order and getting them out to international waters. Well, there was also a third plane that took off later, and then a White House official, disarmed from all those other explanations I just referenced, simply and brazenly claimed it doesn't matter when the flights took off because this was a baseless legal ruling. So this is pretty serious. It's obviously serious for the Constitution, and if the administration is defying that, it's serious for anybody impacted right now, which includes obviously the people deported. Without due process, though, the nation won't really know if they are who the government says they are. And just to go back to the basics, that's why the United States has a constitution that supersedes any single politician, why our founders established those rights and rule of law to begin with. And they warned against exactly the potential abuse of these kind of moves, and how if you start denying rights to some, even if some of them might be guilty or might through a more slowed down process still be found eligible for deportation, right, if you have evidence on them about their legal status or criminal activity, etc. But how those moves can then be used against anyone if there's no check on tyrannical governments. That's the whole point of the Bill of Rights. So it's serious. And yet, we do live in strange political times. And we know that cynical bids to grind people down, to exhaust everyone and normalize almost anything are part of this right-wing process and playbook. Even a violent insurrection can be normalized. It might not even be a conscious strategy at this point. It's a kind of cynical political instinct where anything can be defended, and then normalized and even eventually online trolled, as the term goes, which is the lens I invite you to consider for this post here, retweeted by Marco Rubio. What you're looking at is a very cynical post from a Trump ally there about what happened, with oopsie written there. So America's top diplomat, Marco Rubio, is reposting this. So he's basically sharing this to everyone. Oopsie, too late. A kind of dunking on the judge to normalize this type of legal defiance. The post is from the Trump ally who runs El Salvador, and you can see, too late, the laughing emoji. LOL. How funny. How unserious. And I mentioned trolling because that's the political term of art of trying to get people to be so upset over this that they miss that, yada, yada, yada. But I want us to understand what it means when this is happening from the top diplomat in the United States, a very powerful position, Secretary of State, which Marco Rubio got because he was willing to publicly disavow everything he's ever said about Donald Trump and foreign policy, to eat his own words, because he warned about exactly the thing that he is now doing. He warned about the con, about taking advantage of people, about just using a showmanship and as Rubio put it, a con man's pack of lies to betray what America is and should be. So LOL, Marco Rubio, let's remember what you used to warn us about.
What we are dealing with here, my friends, is a con artist.
He's taking advantage of Americans who are hurting.
If he builds the wall the way he built Trump Towers, he'll be using illegal immigrant labor to do it.